Working the night shift at the Arlington had always suited me. The world was quieter after dark, the guests fewer, and the atmosphere in the grand old hotel felt almost peaceful. At least it used to. I've been here 2 years now, and if you asked me when things began to feel off, I'd struggle to pinpoint the exact moment. The Arlington itself was a relic of another time. Built decades ago, its design was a curious blend of grand old world charm and modern amenities. A place where marble floors met polished brass railings, and faded chandeliers hung over antique furniture. There was something timeless about the place, like the past and present were always just a little tangled. I stood behind the front desk, the soft glow of the overhead lights casting long shadows across the lobby. It was around 10 p.m., and the hotel had settled into its typical nighttime lull. A handful of late guests milled about, a businessman hurrying off to catch an elevator, a couple chatting quietly by the fireplace, but nothing out of the ordinary. My job was to keep things running smoothly through the night, a task that had become almost second nature. I sipped my coffee and stared out at the lobby, my mind wandering. The night shift had a rhythm to it, a kind of predictable monotony that I'd grown accustomed to. Sure, there were always the usual eccentricities of guests, the drunken arguments, the requests for extra towels at 3 a.m., the occasional broken room key, but those things didn't bother me. In fact, I preferred the quiet. It was during these hours that I could let my mind relax. That night, as I stood at my post, my thoughts drifted back to the odd conversation I'd had with Sarah earlier. Sarah was the head of housekeeping, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had been working at the hotel far longer than I had. She had a way of dismissing anything unusual, things that guests would report, strange noises or cold drafts that couldn't be explained. Her favorite line was, "It's an old building, Mark. Of course it has quirks. But what happened last week had been different." "Have you ever noticed anything strange about the 6th floor?" I had asked her casually one night while she was making her rounds. She had paused, her brow furrowing ever so slightly before quickly shaking her head. "Not you too," she'd said with a forced laugh. "Mark, that floor's been closed for renovations. No one's staying there. If you're hearing weird things, it's probably the pipes." I hadn't mentioned it in a while, but I'd noticed something odd about it. It wasn't just that it was closed off. Floors closed for renovations weren't exactly unheard of in a place like this. It was the fact that some nights, it wasn't just closed, it was gone. The first time it happened, I barely noticed. I had been going through the usual routine, checking in late arrivals, handing out key cards, and scheduling wake-up calls. When I glanced at the hotel system to check for any remaining guests on the 6th floor, it wasn't listed. It was like it had been erased from the elevator panel and stairwell listings altogether. At the time, I shrugged it off, but the next night it was back, and the night after that, gone again. The floor seemed to slip in and out of existence without rhyme or reason. "Closed for renovations," Sarah had insisted. "Don't worry about it." But the renovations weren't mentioned anywhere in our official schedule, and no one had spoken to me about moving guests or relocating them. A sudden knock at the front desk pulled me from my thoughts. I blinked, glancing up to see Ben, the day shift manager, standing in front of me with his usual gruff expression. Ben wasn't one for small talk, and though we got along fine, I always felt like he viewed the night shift as something beneath him. "Hey," Ben said, eyeing the cup of coffee in my hand. "Everything running smoothly?" "Same as always," I replied, forcing a smile. "Nothing out of the ordinary." Ben grunted in acknowledgement. He leaned on the desk and cast a glance around the quiet lobby before turning his gaze back to me. "Look, I've been hearing some things from the staff about you asking questions. About the 6th floor." He said it matter-of-factly, but I could sense a warning in his tone. I hesitated. "I was just curious. I mean, one night it's listed in the system, the next it's not. I thought maybe there was a maintenance issue or something." "Don't overthink it, Mark," Ben said, his voice firm. "The 6th floor is off-limits for a reason. If you're getting calls from there or noticing any strange listings, it's just a glitch. This hotel's old. Sometimes things don't work the way they should." I nodded, though I wasn't entirely convinced. Ben didn't give me a chance to respond before straightening up and walking away. "Just stick to your duties," he called over his shoulder as he disappeared through the staff-only door. The rest of the shift passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more going on than Ben or Sarah wanted to admit. I had seen the floor disappear. I had received strange calls from empty rooms. This wasn't just old pipes or outdated systems acting up. Something else was happening here. It wasn't until around 2 a.m., when the lobby had emptied out completely, that the unease started to creep in again. I sat at the desk, staring at the computer screen, debating whether I should check the system one more time. Curiosity got the better of me. I clicked through the hotel listings, scrolling down to the floor directory. My heart skipped a beat. The 6th floor was gone, not marked as closed, not offline, gone, as if it had never existed. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the soft glow of the monitor casting shadows on the desk. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in around me, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the empty lobby. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I checked the elevator panel from my desk, and sure enough, the button for the 6th floor was gone too, replaced by a blank spot between 5 and 7. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing the back of my neck. Maybe Ben was right. Maybe it was a glitch. But the nagging doubt in my mind wouldn't go away. I had to see for myself. I needed to know. I stood, grabbed my key card, and headed toward the elevator. As I stepped into the elevator, my heart raced with a mixture of curiosity and fear. The soft hum of the elevator always had a comforting regularity to it, but tonight it felt different. The air inside the cabin seemed thick, and the usual calmness of my routine was replaced by an uneasy anticipation. The 6th floor had vanished before. Tonight I needed to see if it would return. The elevator panel blinked softly as I scanned the floor numbers. Sure enough, between the buttons for 5 and 7, there was only an empty space. No button for the 6th floor. I pushed the button for the 5th floor instead, thinking I could check the stairwell from there. The elevator began its smooth ascent, and I watched the numbers light up, counting the floors one by one. The ride was unnervingly slow. Each floor ticked by as if the elevator were hesitating. When the doors finally slid open with a soft chime, I stepped out into the floor hallway. The air was cooler here, and the dim lights overhead flickered slightly. I turned toward the stairwell, feeling a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, as though someone was watching me. I shook off the feeling and pushed open the door to the stairwell. The stairwell was narrow and shadowy, lit only by emergency lights casting weak pools of yellow onto the steps. I made my way up the stairs, feeling the solid thud of each footstep as I climbed. When I reached the landing between the 5th and 6th floors, I hesitated. There was a sudden drop in temperature, so sharp that I could see my breath in the cold air. The sign that should have read 6th floor was blank. I stared at it, my pulse quickening. It was as if the 6th floor had been erased from existence, as though the hotel itself had decided it didn't want anyone venturing beyond that point. I pushed open the stairwell door to the hallway, stepping into what should have been the 6th floor. The air felt heavy, pressing against my skin like an invisible weight. The lights in the hallway flickered, casting long shadows that twisted unnaturally. I stood still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light. The hallway stretched out in front of me, eerily quiet. My footfalls were swallowed by the thick carpet, and I was unnerved by the complete absence of sound. No distant chatter from other guests, no hum of the air conditioning, just silence. Then, from somewhere down the hall, I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible giggle, the sound of children laughing. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively glanced over my shoulder, but the hallway behind me was empty. I couldn't explain the laughter, but the sound sent a cold chill through my body. I knew the floor was supposed to be empty, yet the faint sound of laughter drifted through the air, growing fainter as it moved further down the corridor. I swallowed hard and took a few steps forward, drawn by the strange, unsettling sound. Room doors were slightly ajar as I passed them, revealing dark interiors that I couldn't quite make out. The floor seemed abandoned, yet it also felt occupied, as if the presence of something unseen lurked just out of sight. I stopped in front of room 616. The door was cracked open, and a faint glow from within the room spilled into the hallway. My pulse quickened. This was the same room I'd received a call from earlier, despite the hotel system claiming the 6th floor was closed. I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking ominously. Inside, the room was in disarray. The bed was unmade, the lamps on the bedside tables were knocked over, and the curtains were half drawn. It looked as though someone had left in a hurry, but there were no signs of struggle, just an eerie stillness. A strange, musty smell hung in the air, and as I stepped further into the room, my eyes landed on the bathroom mirror. Written in red smeared across the glass were the words, "Get out while you can." I froze. My breath hitched in my throat, and a wave of nausea washed over me. The writing looked fresh, the red letters dripping slightly down the surface of the mirror. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched the glass. The substance was sticky and real. It wasn't a prank. A sharp noise behind me made me spin around, my heart pounding in my chest. The door had slammed shut, and the room was plunged into near darkness. Panic set in as I rushed to the door, yanking it open with trembling hands. I stepped into the hallway, gasping for breath. The lights flickered again, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The oppressive silence returned, but this time, it felt more suffocating. I glanced back at room 616, its door still slightly ajar. The sense of being watched clung to me like a heavy cloak, and I could feel my skin prickling with the weight of unseen eyes. I needed to leave. Back at the front desk, I sat down heavily, my mind racing. I glanced at the security monitor, but nothing seemed out of place. The 6th floor, now missing from the directory once again, looked completely still on the cameras. I rubbed my temples, trying to process what had just happened. The laughter, the writing on the mirror, the door slamming shut on its own. It didn't make sense. I pulled up the hotel's guest records, scrolling through the room assignments. As I feared, room 616 had been marked as unoccupied for days. No one was listed as staying there tonight, or any night for that matter. The system showed it as closed, just like the rest of the 6th floor. I leaned back in my chair, staring blankly at the screen. Something was very wrong here, and I was the only one who seemed to notice. Ben and Sarah could dismiss it as glitches or quirks of an old building, but I knew better. The 6th floor wasn't just closed, it was hiding something. And whatever it wasn't done with me yet. The following nights at the Arlington were a blur of unease and growing paranoia. My mind kept drifting back to the 6th floor, to that room with the writing on the mirror. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it, that maybe it was some twisted prank left by a guest before the floor was closed. But I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong, something deeper than what Ben or Sarah could explain away. Every time I glanced at the hotel system during my shift, my eyes would automatically scroll down to the list of floors, half expecting the 6th floor to appear again. Some nights it did. Others, it was gone, completely erased from the directory, as though it never existed. The inconsistency gnawed at me, and I started to notice something else. Every time the 6th floor returned, strange things happened in the hotel. Guests began complaining more frequently, though not in the way you'd expect. It wasn't about the usual things like the temperature of the room or the water pressure. No, it was much more unsettling than that. One night, a middle-aged woman approached the front desk, her eyes wide with fear. I recognized her as someone who had checked in earlier that day, assigned to a room on the 5th floor. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" I asked, though the answer was already written on her pale face. She shook her head, glancing nervously over her shoulder as if expecting someone or something to appear behind her. "I need to change rooms," There's something wrong with mine. I raised an eyebrow, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. Can you tell me what's wrong? I'll send someone to fix it right away. No, it's not that, she said quickly, her voice hushed. It's not the room itself. It's the walls. I hear things, people moving inside the walls, and there was someone standing at the foot of my bed when I woke up. But when I turned on the light, they were gone. A chill ran down my spine, but I kept my expression neutral. Did you see who it was? Her eyes darted around the lobby, as if she couldn't bring herself to look directly at me. No, it was just a shadow, but it felt like someone was there, watching me. I pulled up the system on the computer, trying to distract myself from the knot of fear building in my stomach. I'll move you to a different room, I said, my fingers trembling slightly as I clicked through the options. Would you prefer a room on a different floor? Yes, she said firmly. As far from the 6th floor as possible. I froze, my hand hovering over the keyboard. The 6th floor? I asked cautiously. You're on the 5th floor. Why do you mention the 6th? She blinked, seeming confused. I don't know, it feels like something's wrong with that floor. I can hear things coming from above me. It doesn't feel right. I nodded, my mind racing. I gave her a new room key for a room on the 3rd floor and watched as she hurried away, glancing over her shoulder one last time before disappearing into the hallway. I stood there for a moment, gripping the edge of the desk, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't imagining things. There was something about the 6th floor, something that reached beyond the confines of its walls and affected the other floors. I could feel it in the way the air grew colder when the floor returned, the way the guests seemed unsettled, without even knowing why. The next night, another guest approached the desk, a businessman this time, staying on the 7th floor. His suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes, as though he hadn't slept in days. I need to check out, he said bluntly, tossing his room key onto the desk. There's something wrong with this place. I stared at him, trying to keep my voice steady. What happened, sir? I lost hours, he said, his voice flat, almost mechanical. I went to bed around midnight. I woke up at 2 a.m. a few moments later when I checked my phone again. It was 8 a.m. I don't remember anything from those hours. It's like they were erased. I frowned. I tried to hide my confusion as I spoke. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. I'm leaving, he interrupted, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. I don't want to stay another night. There's something wrong with this place. That night, after the last guest had left the lobby, I sat behind the front desk, staring at the empty computer screen. The complaints were piling up, people hearing strange noises, losing track of time, feeling watched in their own rooms, and all of them seemed to be tied to the nights when the 6th floor reappeared. It didn't make sense. How could a floor come and go like that, affecting the guests without anyone else noticing? I needed answers. The next night, I couldn't resist the pull of the 6th floor any longer. After the guests had gone to bed and the hotel was quiet, I found myself once again standing in front of the elevator. The button for the 6th floor had returned, glowing faintly as though inviting me back. This time, I didn't hesitate. I pressed the button, and the elevator doors slid shut, the familiar hum filling the air. As I ascended, my stomach twisted with dread. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I couldn't ignore the growing sense of urgency building inside me. The elevator stopped, and the doors opened with a soft chime. The hallway was just as I remembered, dark, cold, and suffocatingly quiet. But this time it felt different. The air was thicker, heavier, as if the floor itself was watching me. I took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway. My footsteps were swallowed by the carpet, the silence pressing in around me like a thick fog. I walked slowly, passing the darkened rooms, their doors slightly ajar as though they were waiting for someone to enter. And then I saw it. Another message, scrawled in red across the mirror in one of the rooms. You're next. The message on the mirror sent a jolt of terror through my body. My pulse quickened as I stared at the words, "You're next." written in a frantic, jagged scrawl. The letters looked fresh, like they had been hastily written moments before I arrived. My mouth went dry, and my hands shook as I backed away from the room, my mind racing. Who could have written it? Was it a guest playing some kind of sick prank? Or was it something more sinister? The thought gnawed at me, making it hard to think clearly. I felt like I had stumbled onto something that wasn't meant for me to see, something dangerous. I had to get out of there. I turned and hurried down the hallway, the oppressive silence pressing in on me from all sides. The flickering lights cast long shadows that twisted and distorted the walls, making it feel like the building itself was shifting around me. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to run, but I forced myself to stay calm. Running would only make it worse. As I reached the end of the hallway, something caught my eye. There, just ahead, was a group of hotel staff, 3 or 4 of them, standing at the far end of the corridor. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief. Maybe I wasn't alone after all. Maybe they could explain what was going on. But as I took a few steps closer, I realized something was terribly wrong. They were dressed in uniforms that were clearly from another era. Bellhops in red jackets with brass buttons, maids in old-fashioned black and white attire, and a front desk clerk in a stiff, high-collared suit. They stood perfectly still, their backs to me, as if they were waiting for something. I opened my mouth to call out, but the words died in my throat. Their movements were strange, unnatural, the way they shifted their weight from one foot to the other, the slight tilts of their heads. It was stiff, robotic, like they were puppets on strings. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Something wasn't right. These weren't regular staff members. I watched in growing horror as one by one, they began to turn around, their movements jerky and mechanical. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. When they finally faced me, my blood ran cold. Their faces were blank, no eyes, no mouths, just smooth, featureless skin where their faces should have been. They stood there, expressionless, if you could even call it that, staring at me with those empty, non-existent faces. The air around me grew colder, and the oppressive weight of the floor seemed to press down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. I needed to get away from them, but my feet felt heavy, like I was wading through thick, invisible mud. The staff didn't move, but I could feel their presence pulling at me, drawing me in like the 6th floor had been doing for days. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice barely more than a whisper. No response. The blank-faced staff stood perfectly still, their heads slightly tilted as if waiting for something. Then, without warning, they turned in unison and began to walk toward one of the rooms, room 616. The door swung open as they approached, and they filed inside, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, frozen in place. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. Something inside me, a morbid curiosity, or maybe a deep-seated fear, compelled me to follow them. I stepped towards room 616, my legs trembling. When I reached the doorway, I hesitated. The room beyond was dark, shadows dancing across the floor like living things. I could hear a faint whispering sound coming from within, but I couldn't make out the words. Slowly, I pushed the door open. Inside, the room was empty. No staff, no furniture, just an empty, silent room. But there, lying on the bed, was a single note. My hands shook as I picked it up. The paper was old, yellowed with age, and the handwriting was smudged and uneven. I held it up to the dim light coming through the window and read the words, "We're still working." I backed out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I had seen enough. I didn't care what Sarah or Ben said anymore. Something was horribly wrong with this hotel, and it centered around the 6th floor. The staff I had seen weren't real, or at least not anymore. They were like echoes of the past, trapped in some twisted loop, and now I was caught up in it. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of the hotel, get far away from the 6th floor, before it consumed me like it had those staff members. I bolted for the elevator, my footsteps echoing through the empty hallway. But when I reached the doors and pressed the button, nothing happened. The elevator stayed on another floor, unmoving. The button for the 6th floor was no longer illuminated. A sense of panic began to rise in my chest as I turned toward the stairwell. I pushed open the door, expecting to find my way down to the lobby, but what I saw stopped me in my tracks. The stairwell was gone. In its place was another hallway, just like the one I had just come from. The same flickering lights, the same thick carpet, the same oppressive silence. My pulse quickened, and I backed away, turning to look behind me. But the hallway I had just come from had changed too. It stretched endlessly in both directions, as if I had been transported to some other part of the hotel that shouldn't exist. I was trapped. I tried to stay calm, tried to reason with myself. This was just a trick of the mind, a hallucination brought on by stress and fatigue. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The hotel was shifting around me, warping reality in ways I couldn't explain. I started walking, hoping that if I kept moving, I would find a way out. But no matter how far I walked, the hallway stretched on endlessly. The exit signs at the far end of the corridor flickered in and out of sight, always just out of reach. It was as if the building itself was toying with me, keeping me trapped in this nightmarish loop. Finally, after what felt like hours of walking, I saw it. A door marked "Staff Only." I didn't hesitate. I rushed toward it, my heart pounding in my chest, and twisted the handle. The door swung open, and I stumbled through it, expecting to find myself back in the stairwell or the lobby. But instead, I found myself standing in front of the front desk. I blinked, disoriented. The lobby was empty, just as I had left it earlier. The soft glow of the overhead lights cast long shadows across the marble floor. Everything was exactly as it had been before I stepped onto the 6th floor. Had I imagined it all? The phantom staff, the endless hallways, the message on the mirror. It all seemed so distant now, like a half-remembered dream. But as I glanced at the security monitors, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The cameras for the 6th floor flickered briefly, and for a split second, I saw them, the staff, standing perfectly still in the hallway, their blank faces turned toward the camera. As if they were watching me, I backed away from the monitor, my hands trembling. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I couldn't sleep after that night. Even when my shift was over, I couldn't shake the images from my mind. The blank faces of the phantom staff, the endless hallway, the ominous message scrawled on the mirror. I found myself avoiding the mirrors in my own apartment too. Whenever I glanced at one, I would catch a flicker of something, shadows that shouldn't be there, movements that didn't belong to me. It was as if the 6th floor was creeping into my life, even when I wasn't at the hotel. The nightmares didn't help either. Every night, I dreamt of being trapped in the hotel, lost in that labyrinthine hallway that never seemed to end. In my dreams, I was always running from something I couldn't see, but could feel lurking just behind me, waiting for me to slow down, waiting to catch me. Each time I would wake up in a cold sweat, the sense of dread lingering long after the dream faded. A few nights later, I was back at the front desk. The hotel was quiet as usual, the guests long since retired to their rooms. I had been watching the security monitors closely, especially the ones for the 6th floor. Tonight, the floor was listed in the system again, but the cameras showed nothing out of the ordinary, just an empty hallway, the lights flickering occasionally. I kept telling myself that it was all in my head, that the things I had seen were just tricks of the mind, glitches in the old building. But deep down, I knew better. The hotel was playing games with me, and I didn't know how to fight back. Around 2 a.m., the phone rang. I stared at it for a moment, my stomach twisting with dread. Every time the phone rang now, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, as if each call was pulling me deeper into whatever dark force was haunting the 6th floor. I picked up the receiver, trying to keep my voice steady. "Front desk, this is Mark." There was a pause, followed by a low, crackling static. Then through the static, I heard a voice, distorted, faint, but unmistakably human. "Room 621. I blinked, checking the system. Room 621 was listed as unoccupied. "Hello?" I said into the phone, my voice betraying the growing unease in my chest. "Can you repeat that?" There was no response, just static. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. Was this another glitch? Or was someone playing a sick joke on me? Either way, I knew I couldn't just ignore it. I grabbed my keycard and headed toward the elevator, my hands trembling slightly as I pressed the button for the 6th floor. The elevator ride was silent, the hum of the machinery somehow more ominous than usual. When the doors slid open, I stepped out into the now familiar hallway. The air was thick, heavy with that strange, oppressive atmosphere I had come to associate with the 6th floor. I walked down the hall, counting the numbers on the doors as I went. 619, 620, 621. I stopped in front of the door, my heart racing. The door was closed, but I could feel something on the other side. It was as if the air around the door was alive, pulsing with some unseen force. I swiped my keycard, the lock clicking softly as the door swung open. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight, casting deep shadows across the floor. I reached for the light switch, but nothing happened. The bulb must have burned out. I stepped inside, the door closing softly behind me. The room felt colder than the rest of the hotel, the air heavy and stale. As I moved further into the room, I noticed something strange. There were no mirrors. Not on the walls, not in the bathroom, nothing. Every reflective surface had been removed. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized how unusual that was. I had worked at this hotel for 2 years, and every room had a standard set of mirrors, one above the sink in the bathroom, a full-length mirror by the closet, and sometimes even smaller ones on the dresser. But here, there was nothing. I swallowed hard, backing toward the door, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it, reflected in the glossy black surface of the television screen. A shadow. It stood behind me, tall and dark, its form barely distinguishable from the surrounding gloom. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the screen, unable to tear my gaze away. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its presence. It was watching me, waiting. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, but the room was empty. Nothing. Just shadows and silence. I backed toward the door, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the handle. I needed to get out of there. I needed to leave this room, this floor, this hotel. I yanked on the handle, my heart racing, but it was as if the door had vanished into the wall. There was no escape. I was trapped. Panic set in as I turned toward the window, hoping to find some other way out, but the windows were sealed shut. I couldn't even see the city lights beyond, just an endless expanse of darkness pressing against the glass. I tried my phone, but the screen was black, unresponsive. My radio, too, emitted nothing but static. I was completely cut off. The air in the room grew colder, and I could feel the presence of something unseen watching me. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, closing in on me, suffocating me. I stumbled back to the center of the room, my mind racing with fear and confusion. Then, without warning, I heard it. A soft knock, coming from inside the room. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The knock came again, louder this time, as if someone or something was trying to get my attention. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the room, but there was no one there. Just shadows. The knock came again, but this time it was right behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, but once again, the room was empty. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, the shadows shifting and writhing in the dim light, and then the room fell silent. The oppressive weight of the air pressing down on me like a vice. I didn't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, waiting for something, anything to happen. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The door. It had reappeared. I didn't waste any time. I rushed toward it, yanking it open with trembling hands. I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath, my heart still racing from the terror of what I had just experienced. I looked back at the door to room 621, half expecting it to vanish again, but it remained where it was, closed, silent, and unassuming, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But I knew better. Something was wrong with this place, and I had a sinking feeling that I was getting closer to the truth, a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. I hurried down the hallway, refusing to glance over my shoulder, convinced that the shadows were moving, twisting, watching me. When I reached the elevator, I pressed the button frantically. The lights above flickered, and for a moment, I thought it wouldn't come. The soft hum of the machinery finally filled the silence, and the doors opened with a smooth chime. I stepped inside, my heart racing, and pressed the button for the lobby. The ride down felt excruciatingly slow, and I found myself watching the numbers on the panel intently. Back at the front desk, I sat down heavily, my hands shaking as I tried to steady my breathing. My mind was racing, replaying everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The disappearing floor, the strange messages, the phantom staff. It was all too much. It didn't feel real, but I knew it was. I needed answers. I logged into the hotel's old archive system, an outdated collection of files, reports, and blueprints that no one had bothered with in years. The information I was looking for had to be buried here somewhere, and it took me nearly an hour of scrolling through irrelevant documents before I found something. An old incident report from the early 1970s, simply titled, "Closure of the 6th Floor." My heart raced as I opened the file. The report was brief, the details vague, but it told me enough. According to the document, the 6th floor had been permanently closed after a series of unexplained deaths. Guests who checked in on that floor were found dead under mysterious circumstances, heart attacks, or cases where there was no apparent cause of death at all. One chilling account described a guest who was found standing in the middle of their room, eyes wide open, completely frozen. The floor was supposed to have been sealed off decades ago, but something had gone horribly wrong. The hotel management at the time had quietly shut it down, hiding the deaths from the public. But the 6th floor hadn't stayed closed. Every few decades it reappeared, drawing in new guests. My heart pounded at the realization that this was happening again, and it was happening for weeks now. The phone buzzed, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was Sarah, the head of housekeeping. "Mark, where are you?" she asked, her voice sounding distant, almost distorted. "I'm on the 5th floor. I thought I saw someone wandering around, but when I got there, the floor was empty." I hesitated, unsure if I should tell her about everything I had discovered. But she had always brushed off my concerns, always telling me that it was just an old building acting up. Would she even believe me? I'm at the desk. Stay away from the 6th floor, Sarah. There's something wrong with it. I've been getting calls, and there's more to it than you think. There was silence on the other end, but I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. "I've been hearing things too," she said after a long pause. "Voices, footsteps. I thought it was just in my head, but you're telling me it's real?" "More real than I want to admit," I replied. "You need to get out of here, Sarah. Whatever's happening on that floor, it's not safe." Sarah didn't respond. There was a soft click, and the line went dead. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of anxious pacing and stolen glances at the security monitors. Every time the camera feed flickered, I felt my stomach lurch, half expecting to see those blank-faced staff members again, waiting for me. It wasn't until just before dawn, as I was preparing to hand over the shift to the day staff, that something strange happened. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and I watched as a group of guests stepped out, chatting softly amongst themselves. They were all wearing clothes from another era. Suits from the 1970s, dresses with high collars and lace, and their faces, pale, expressionless. Their eyes didn't meet mine as they crossed the lobby and exited the hotel, disappearing into the early morning light. I stood frozen behind the desk, my mind struggling to process what I had just seen. It was as if the hotel's past was bleeding into the present, the ghosts of those trapped on the 6th floor spilling out into the world beyond. I couldn't stay at the Arlington after that. I handed in my resignation that morning, packed up my things, and left the hotel. But even now, weeks later, the memories of the 6th floor still haunt me. I still see the figures in my dreams, blank-faced staff members, shadowy figures standing at the foot of my bed. I still hear the soft, distant knock coming from inside the walls. And every now and then, when I glance into a mirror, I see something else looking back at me, something that doesn't belong. I try to tell myself it's all in my head, that it was just a bad experience in an old haunted hotel, but deep down, I know the truth. The 6th floor is still there, waiting,